And John is just so competitive. He's always going to be wondering what everybody's doing. So I'm sure that he began to feel that itch to do something now and then through that latter part of the 70s. I'm sure it drove him nuts to see what everybody else was doing, saying, look, everybody else is having fun. I want to have fun too. I like what they're doing over there. That looks like a lot of fun. Can I play? Yeah, John, you can play. All you got to do is, just kind of get out your guitar, get at the piano, and play a few songs. And that's exactly what he did. Hi, I'm Jackie, and welcome to my bower. I wanted to do a follow-up to my John Lennon starting over and over and over video because I wanted to clarify a few things because John Lennon deserves it, the Beatles deserve it, and you deserve it. And I do appreciate you hanging in there with me while I do a little bit of cleaning up. And John definitely did want to start over in the early part of the 70s, but I'm not so sure he wanted to start over and over and over again. But he is very good at change. He is very good at evolving. And I do feel by the time he got to the end of the 70s that he had probably found a lot of peace. But he had definitely experienced a lot of ups and downs through the 70s, just like Paul and George and Ringo did. But with John, he was a little bit more angsty about it. He blew things up and attached himself to these other causes and this other identity that he really wanted to strive for. He said, this is important to me now. Paul would say, yeah, John just goes overboard. So maybe he went overboard a little bit. And he also started attracting a lot of unwanted attention to himself from the US government. So it got definitely uncomfortable. And I'm not so sure that he wanted to blow up his marriage with Yoko. I don't really think he did, but something had to change. So I guess the both of them decided, hey, we needed this break. Hence the long weekend. The long weekend, being the latter part of 1973 going all through the beginning part of 1975. So that's a long period of time, like about a year and a half, I think is what it was, that John began to sort things out. Began to kind of realize, I guess I'm always going to be known as a Beatle. Maybe the Beatles are going to get back together. And he began to see Paul. He began to talk to Paul, and he began to see and talk to George here and there. And he never had to get back with Ringo because he never broke up with Ringo. And he worked with a lot of other recording artists, and he created his own albums and made his own success, got back in touch with his rock and roll roots, got back in touch with Cynthia and Julian, and began to sort of sort things out and to say, maybe this is okay if I think about this. I don't need to have all this stuff in the junk drawer or in the trash. Maybe it can still be part of me. Maybe these old influences and these old inspirations, they're part of me, and I don't have to just cover them up. I can just pull them out from time to time and use them as needed. No big deal. So I feel like once he began to understand that and find some success in that, and a success in his recording career, and he found success in front of an audience when he was there with Elton John, he began to say, okay, I'm kind of cool. I can do this. This all feels good. Maybe I don't need the Lost Weekend anymore. He blew that up too, but not in such a big way as he was blowing up the Beatles. And so now he patches things up with Yoko because he didn't necessarily blow things up entirely with Yoko. And he decides, okay, I don't really know what I want to do, but I want to be a house husband. Maybe I can do that. And I know I can be a daddy. So he multitasks in that latter part of the 70s. And he has that jigsaw puzzle out here trying to say, okay, here's all these little parts of me that I'm hanging on to. I don't know how it all fits together, but I'm going to try this and I'm going to try that. I don't know what it's going to look like at the end because I don't have the box top with the picture on it. So John is basically, flying in the dark. Little bit of music here, little bit of travel there, little bit of baking bread there. So it's all just John just playing this whole, the latter part of the 70s was his playground, trying to not take things too seriously, just being John. And he's also keeping his ear to the ground with regards to the music scene. And he's seeing what Paul is doing, seeing what George is doing, seeing what Bob Dylan is doing, the Stones, seeing what everybody's doing. And he's still got that competitive spirit there. That isn't going to go away because that's who John is. John is this competitive, creative guy who wants to change, who wants to evolve, who is inspired by this and that. So all of these sparks are going when he allows it to. I mean, he's just, that part of him was just not going to go away no matter how hard he tried. So when John kind of rediscovered who he was, and he rediscovered his fire and his passion and let go of his fear when he was there in Bermuda, piloting that boat or captaining that boat, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, captaining that little sloop there in Bermuda, he kind of said, okay, I can do this. And it inspired him. It shifted him. And he went back in the studio, and him and Yoko created Double Fantasy. And he didn't blow up the house husband years. I don't feel like he was going to blow it up. But I do feel like I want to look at maybe what he did in the 80s. I kind of want to take a look at that. And he did say they were going to go on tour with Double Fantasy, him and Yoko. I feel like that's probably what happened. I feel like they probably had a bit of a low profile tour, did it for a while, had some fun, and then probably went back home and kind of did whatever they were going to do at home. Maybe did some more traveling. And that sort of mirrors what Paul and George and Ringo were doing. Just trying a little bit here, trying a little bit of that. Just like a lot of stars from the 60s, like a lot of rock stars in the 60s did. They were all trying to figure things out. Who we are, what do we fit in, what is our music? Just evolving. And I actually think like John does that evolving thing best now. So John is just kind of letting things simmer a bit, trying out a few things. I think that's what he would do. And Paul and George are doing that. They're trying a few things. I think that what John would have done in the early part of the 80s is he would have toured maybe with a couple of different people, done low key. I don't know who he would have toured with. Maybe he would have went on tour with Elton John. Maybe he would have just made a few guest appearances in small venues. I don't know. I'm sure that he would have made a few albums trying different styles because I feel like that's him. He would have worked with Yoko some more. I don't know. But I feel like he would have been experimenting in the 80s and not putting out as much as Paul. But I feel like he would have put out more than George. And I do feel like he would continue helping out Ringo because that's what that relationship is about. And I also feel like John Lennon would have been getting his mojo back, his mojo as a rock star, and feeling a lot more powerful and at peace with his past. And that's why I feel like he most likely would have been a lot more warm in his communications with Paul and George, and also more frequent. I don't feel like they would have been hanging out together a lot. I don't feel like they would have been working together, him and Paul. I don't feel like that at all. I feel like most likely what would have happened is because John is getting his mojo back, feeling a lot more confident in his output, still competitive. I think that, John was always going to be competitive and jealous. But because I feel at this point in time, he probably would have been feeling a lot more eye to eye with Paul and more eye to eye with George, he would have felt like, okay, I don't have to worry so much about things. Some of our legal stuff is behind us now. By the time the mid 80s come around, and I've been on tour a little bit. I've been working with other artists. I've had some success with my own production. So when Paul calls me, I can be nice and I can listen. And we can talk about music now, about what's been happening, about what he's doing, and maybe about what he's working on. I'm not going to really tell him so much about what I'm working on, but maybe I'll listen to him. And so Paul, I feel, would have a hard time not asking John what he might think of some lyrics or something that he was working on. Now, I don't feel like they would be in the studio together. I don't feel that by the time the mid-'80s come around. But I feel that Paul would definitely be saying, hey, John, what do you think about this lyric? What do you think about that? And John would have been very hard put not to say something. I know what he's doing. He wants me to give him help. I know what's going on here. He wants me to, and John cannot help. It's like a magnet to John. It's like, I got to do this. So John would just say, okay, it needs this. This is what you need to do. This will make it work. And Paul would just go, yes. So they would not really work officially on a song, but I do feel that this is what would happen. I feel like they couldn't help it. It's like, so they're just, doing, it's not phone sex, but it's definitely this phone songwriting together that they're doing. They couldn't help it. And with George, I feel like what he would do with George is he'd probably party with George. I feel like him and George would hang out. They'd go to other concerts together. They'd get high together. They just do that together. Just kind of blow off steam and maybe relive the old days. Maybe play ukuleles together. I don't know. But I don't feel like they would work together. I just feel like they would have fun. I think that John would feel a lot more comforter just being a pal to George. Okay. And there was definitely that I Me Mine book. There was nothing. That was a nothing burger. That was not a fight. John, I know that they were cool together by 1980. Okay. Because John did say, hey, I still love these guys. So, and I feel in the 80s, I feel like in the 80s, they would have been better able, all of them, to just make peace with each other. Just to kind of still take a step back from working together and also from not being around each other a lot because you don't want the rumors going or they getting back together because I'm sure that they would have been having to deal with a lot of that all the time. Are they getting back together? What's happening? What are they doing? So they would have been avoiding the spotlight at all costs. That's why I feel like they wouldn't have been working together. They would have just been doing this phone stuff. Okay. They just would have been doing that. Okay. So they would have been just talking on the phone. But with George, probably not helping with the music. But I feel John probably would have played George. Like, what do you think about this? So if they're hanging out together, they're partying together, they may have just been playing guitars together. No big deal. Not really working on anything, just playing guitars together. And I think obviously with Ringo, he'd still be helping Ringo out in the 80s. And then I also feel like John would have shown up to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. So I think George was right. If John was around, John would have shown up. And if John showed up, I know that Paul would have shown up. Because through thick and thin, John was the leader. John was that spiritual, charismatic leader of the Beatles. And when John would say, okay, because he would do that in the studio, like, okay, he would say that all the time and everybody would rally around. Everybody would say, okay, we're going to take. That's the energy of John saying, okay, here we are. We're going to do this. And they would route all eyes on John because, that's John's energy. It's like, we're doing it now. Okay. Right. Here we are. We're doing the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction thing. Here we go. We're the four-headed monster. Here we are. So, and it would have been very different. So Paul would have shown it. I think it all would have been fabulous. I think it would have been wonderful. And in that setting, I think that it would have been safe for them to all show up as a group. Because I feel like at that point in time, they would all have been feeling pretty more relaxed, more established as solo artists, and feeling like, okay, we don't have to worry so much about Beatles, even though we are Beatles on stage here. We're still who we are. We can go home and be John, Paul, George, and Ringo. It's cool. And I'd also feel like John would approve of the Traveling Wilburys, even though he wouldn't have been a Wilbury. I don't think that's what he would have done. But I feel like, John would have said, I don't like this. What are they doing? I feel like John would have had opinions because that's John. But I also feel he probably would have liked some of the songs. That's John. And I also feel like he would have enjoyed Paul's output as well. Probably would have been jealous of some of it. Probably wouldn't have said anything, but I feel like he would have been taking notes. And once again, helping Ringo. Whenever Ringo would need help, I think John would be there, and vice versa. And going into the 90s, I feel like, they would have done an anthology. And once again, when John shows up, when they're all four together, everybody kind of rallies around still. So, and I got to tell you, so John in the 80s would have done Free as a Bird. He would have put that out. John would have put out Now and Then and Real Love. So all of those would have been off the table during anthology. So guess what? They would have had to come up with all new songs, and I think there would have been a brand new album. I think absolutely that is what would have happened, because once they got in the studio, maybe some of it would be remote, some of it would be like all four together, but when they would get together, that is when the magic happens, and they could not help themselves but make some magic and make some music. I know that's what would have happened. Absolutely. And we could have had all four of them on that little blanket at Friar Park, on those four sides of the blanket, one in each corner, all kind of facing each other. Ringo kind of clapping, smacking his legs like that. They all would have had ukuleles, singing whatever song. I don't know what song they would have been singing, maybe a new one, who knows. But they all would have been together, and we could have got some 3-part harmony going right there. It would have been beautiful. And who knows, maybe John was there. Oh my God. And of course he was. Of course John was there. Because John isn't going to let them do something without him. It's just not going to happen. Thank you so much for being here with me. And until next time, peace and love one another. Take care.